Hi, my name is Martin Perhiniak. Welcome back to the Digital Art series here on PSD Touch Plus. This is the second episode where I'm going to talk about brushes and using a graphic tablet. First of all, we need to understand what's the difference between using a mouse and a graphic tablet together with Photoshop. Here on the left you can see a comparison between the mouse and the tablet, but I would like to also show you, if I go to the brushes panel and I turn off the shape dynamics, this is most of the time what you can achieve with a mouse. Because the mouse doesn't have pressure sensitivity, that's why you will probably end up with a brush something like this. So whenever you draw, it will be the same size. And obviously with a mouse it's quite difficult to draw precise lines and curves. But if I have a tablet, I can use the pen pressure to control the size or any of the properties of the brush. In this case I use shape dynamics and controlling the size with the pen pressure. And you can immediately see here on the preview that now, thanks to the pen pressure, I can draw a line and controlling the size with my pen's pressure. So the more I press it down on the tablet, the harder or larger the size of the brush will get. And at the same time, I have much more control over the drawing as well. If I go back a couple of steps, I can show you with the tablet, I have really good control over my lines. So I can draw very precisely, and it's also very dynamic. I already showed you the brushes panel, but before we get to those options, it's good to know about the options here on the top, on the control panel. The reason why I start with the brush options, because we are going to use most of the time the brush tool to paint and to create artwork in Photoshop. So that's why it's really important to understand these options here on the top. First of all, we have this option here on the left, where we can save and create and then select presets. So whatever you set up for a brush, you can store it as a preset. Now this is really useful, and I will come back to this later once we set up something. The next option here is to set up the size and the hardness and to choose a brush tip shape. Now you can create brush tip shapes, and that's again something that I'm going to talk about in more details in the next episode. So that's how to create custom brushes. But first of all, we are going to use the default ones in Photoshop in this lesson. So the size and hardness is quite simple to understand. Increasing and decreasing the size will change the size of your brush, and the hardness will make it soft or hard on the edges. Now these two options can be easily changed with keyboard shortcuts. And this specific keyboard shortcut works the best in CS5. It also works in CS4, but there it's a bit more complicated. So I'm going to concentrate on CS5 at the moment. If you hold down Ctrl and Alt on the keyboard while you have your brush, to tell the truth, it works with all the drawing tools in Photoshop. So if you hold down Ctrl and Alt together and then you click with your brush, you won't draw, but you will see a preview of your brush size and hardness. And then if you click and drag to the right, you increase the size. If you drag to the left, you decrease the size. And if you drag down, you make it hard edge brush. If you drag up, you make it soft edge brush. So that's up and down and right and left movement on my tablet. If you are a Mac user, it's Ctrl and Alt. Be careful, it's not Command. It's Ctrl, Alt, and click and then drag right, left, up, and down. If you are a PC user, it's also Ctrl and Alt, but then you need to use right click. Okay. If you have a tablet, on the pen you can set up the right click for the buttons on your pen. I found this the most useful way to change these two basic attributes of the brush, so the hardness and the size. You can always right click and change the size and hardness here if you need a specific percentage for the hardness or the size. But what you can also do is to use another keyboard shortcut, the bracket keys. The bracket keys on your keyboard can be also used, so the square bracket keys will also increase and decrease the size of the brush. And if you add shift, you can change the hardness of the brush, so shift and the bracket keys together. The next very important thing with the brush is the opacity, and you can also change this by adding a value here, or instead of clicking on that little arrow, you can click on the opacity option and drag it left and right. But you can also change the opacity with an easier keyboard shortcut using the number keys, like pressing 5 will change the opacity to 50%. You should know that these keyboard shortcuts would change the opacity of the layer if you have another tool selected. So if you don't have a drawing tool which has an opacity attribute, then the keyboard shortcut will change the opacity of the layer. So for example, now if I select the move tool, which doesn't have an opacity, then if I press 5, you will see we change the opacity of the selected layer. If I press 0, that will set it back to 100%. And if I select the brush, which is also can be selected from the toolbar, or you can also press B as brush on the keyboard. So now I'm back to my brush tool, and if I press 0, that will set it back to 100%. If I want to have a specific opacity like 25%, I press 2 and 5 after one another. So 2 and 5, and now it's set to 25%. And you can see the change on the opacity of the brush. Let me just set this back to 100%, and I'm going to show you what's flow. If I set flow to 10%, for example, you can also do that here on the top, or using Shift plus a keyboard, Shift plus a number on your keyboard. I press Shift 1, and that set the flow to 10%. It's similar to opacity, but the difference with this is if I start drawing and I continue drawing, then with one brush stroke I can build up a 100% opacity if I continue drawing that brush stroke. While if I have the opacity on 10% and flow on 100%, let me do that. So I just set the opposite, so opacity 10%, flow 100%. I start drawing, and no matter how long I draw over a part, it will always stay 10% opaque. And only when I let go my pen or my mouse and then I click again and draw over, then I can add more opacity. And if I continue doing this, I can build up a more dense and solid value or volume here with my brush. So that's the difference between the opacity and the flow. They both control the opacity or the transparency of the brush, but in a different way. Let me just set back the opacity also to 100% now, and I just delete these elements from my layer. I usually, if I want to delete everything from a layer, I press Command A or Control A on PC, which is select all, and then press backspace. And then I use Command or Control D to deselect it. Now I already talked about opacity and flow, but I didn't mention the airbrush mode. This is the option here. If I enable the airbrush mode, that is also a bit similar to the flow option. So let me just first show you without this. If I click now and hold down my pen, this is what happens. But if I have the airbrush mode on, I can use my pen pressure to control the flow of the ink. So if I click and I hold down and I add more pressure, I can increase the size of the brush. So let me show it again without it. I click and that's it. Even if I change the pressure, it won't change that brush. But with the airbrush option on, I can always add and change the size of the brush or the density of the ink by holding down and changing the pen pressure. So that's also a useful option. I usually don't work with this one, but sometimes if I need it, it's easy to turn it on here on the top on the control bar. The other interesting options in CS5 that we have these little icons here on the top next to opacity. If you turn this on, that will enable the pen pressure to control the opacity. So now if I start drawing, you can see that if I add more pressure on the tablet, with one brush stroke, I can change the opacity. And if I don't want to see these little steps between the changes, I just need to go to the brush panel. And here on the brush tip shape options, I need to set the spacing to 1%. As you can see, spacing controls the steps of the brush. So when you draw, it will make a smoother flow if you set it to 1%. So now if I draw, you can see that by changing the pen pressure, I can control the opacity. That's the option here on the top. This is also something that you can go to the brush panel and turn it on by going to transfer and then choosing pen pressure for opacity to control the opacity. There is also another icon here on the top, this one, which can be used to control the size with the pen pressure. So now I turn off the other one and I just leave this one on, and I show you now if I change the pen pressure, I can control the size of the brush. And if I want to do both at the same time, I just need to turn both of them on. So now if I draw, I will change the size and the opacity at the same time. Again, this option, the size option, can be also found on the brush panel under Shape Dynamics and set the pen pressure to control the size. There are lots of options here in the brush panel, and it is like an extension of the options here on the control bar. The only option on the control bar which I haven't mentioned is the blend mode. Now, using a blend mode with the brush is quite advanced, but it's also a very useful option, and I will talk about this later when we start drawing. But to tell the truth, I prefer to use blend modes on layers instead of using blend modes with the drawing tools. For those who haven't used blend modes before, I just show you one, which is I think is the most interesting to start with. I just show you this one. So if I change the color of the brush to red, here with the color picker option, I change it to red and click on OK. So by clicking on this swatch here on the bottom, you can always change the color. But there is also another keyboard shortcut which is good to know. Control Alt and Command, or Control Alt and Shift on the PC. You can click and then use this color wheel to select a color. This is also something that we are going to use a lot in this series. So now I have the red color, and if I start drawing here, I'm drawing over these details. Let me just zoom a bit closer. So as you can see, I draw over it, but if I set the blend mode of the brush to behind, then I'm going to draw behind those details. And this is a great feature. I really like this option. But I will talk more about blend modes in the other episodes. So let me just switch back to normal. Now I would like to talk more about the brush panel in the next episode as well, because there we are going to create custom brushes, and to learn how to use these options here and how to save them as a brush preset is a bit complicated, so it's good to have a separate episode for that. So for now, it's enough if you remember Shape Dynamics and Transfer options and setting the pen pressure for the size and the opacity. But remember, you can always use these little icons here on the top to change these settings. And if you want to open the brush panel, you can always click on this icon here on the top, and that will open the brush panel where you can always see a preview of your brush. And last but not least, I would like to talk quickly about tablets, because probably if you are using a mouse and you are interested in digital art, you're probably trying to find out which is the best solution for you. So what kind of tablet is the best to buy? I have been working with tablets for 7 years, and I really trust Wacom because their products are just amazing. So I think everyone can find what they need by choosing one of their products. All of their products are really high quality, and really easy to use. It mainly depends on your type of work and budget that which product is the best for you. So let me just go through the families that they have. That's the bamboo family, which is the smallest one and the most inexpensive. It's the best option if you want to learn to draw in Photoshop and if you are completely new to digital art and if you never used tablets before, because it's quite cheap but still gives you really good control, and it's also really easy to carry with you anywhere where you go because it's really small and very light. I usually use bamboos for presentations, so it's a great tablet. And as an extra, you can even use your hand movements, your gestures on the tablet, so not just the pen, to control the view or just to flick around images. It is similar to a touchpad on a MacBook. So it's a great choice for beginners. But if you feel more confident and you would like to have even better control and even more precise movements, then the next category is Intuos. Again, you can see they have lots of different sizes. I prefer the second one, the medium size, if I work on a laptop. But if I work on a big screen, let's say a 27-inch screen, then it's better to have a bigger tablet. So the larger your screen, the larger your tablet should be. But even the smallest one gives you better control than the bamboo tablets. You also have these buttons which you can use for shortcuts and functions in Photoshop or any applications, which is also a big bonus because on the bamboo you usually get 2 or 4 buttons only. But the Intuos tablets are more expensive than the bamboo tablets, of course. And if you are willing to invest into a tablet even more money, then you can go to the third level, the Cintiq tablets, which is definitely the best product if you want to do digital art. These tablets are not just simply tablets, but they are also screens. So if you connect them to your computer, it's like a secondary monitor or screen where you can work directly on the screen and paint and draw on the screen. They have 2 different sizes. They have the 12-inch screen size and the 21-inch screen size. This way of drawing is the closest to traditional media because here you can actually feel that you add ink to the paper if you are drawing on the screen, and you don't need to get used to drawing on a tablet and at the same time looking at the screen, because here your hand movements and the brush strokes are on the same place. That's something which is quite weird for the first time if you never used a tablet before. So if you use an Intuos or a bamboo for the first time, to get used to that drawing on the side and see the brush strokes on the screen. So it's a new hand-eye coordination that you need to get used to, and that's something that you won't have to deal with if you have a Cintiq. But there's only one small tiny disadvantage on the Cintiq screens. If you ever tried drawing with an Intuos or a bamboo and you got used to it, then if you draw on a Cintiq, you will find it a bit distracting that your hand and the pen is always in the way. So you are actually hiding some parts of the image with your hand. It's just like on a paper, you need to move your hand away sometimes to see the whole picture. So it's the same on a Cintiq, because you are drawing on the screen, you are actually hiding some parts of the screen with your hand. But as I said, this is a very small disadvantage. And believe me, it's great fun to be able to draw on the screen and to have a device like this. So if you really want to invest into buying a tablet, I highly recommend the Cintiq tablets. And obviously the smaller one is easier to carry around and easier to store than the big one. But the big one is like a big canvas, so you see more of your artwork at the same time. You don't need to zoom in and out all the time. So this is just a quick introduction to the tablets. And obviously there are other companies, not just Wacom, but I always use Wacom tablets, so I have experience with these products, and I'm really happy with these products, so I can highly recommend them to anyone. And believe me, if you're not good with drawing, nowadays with these tablets you can even learn to draw on your computer. And that's all that I wanted to talk about in this episode. I hope I gave you some useful information about tablets, and also you've learned some new things about the brush tool. In the next episode I will talk more about the brush panel, and I will show you how to create custom brushes. So make sure you join me next time as well. Thanks for your attention, and start practicing with the brush tool.